Thank you everyone for being here. So we are hosting our guest speaker, Dr. Cynthia Nebel, who is the Director of Learning Services at the Medical School at St. Louis University, correct?
Yep.
Has taught psychology, let's see if I can remember, Washburn, Vanderbilt, and what am I missing?
Lindenwood.
Lindenwood, nearby.
Yeah.
And completed her PhD in cognitive psychology at nearby Washington University. So she's here to talk about retrieval practice, and you have the floor, so thank you for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm excited to tell you guys, retrieval practice is probably my most favorite thing to talk about ever. So I'm excited to tell you a little bit about it. So what I want to do today is tell you a bit about retrieval practice, some of the research behind it, just to kind of prove to you that it's a good idea to do. Some ideas for how you can implement retrieval practice on your own, and then some do's and don'ts, where retrieval practice sometimes goes wrong. If we wrap all of that up, and we want to, I have some bonus material too. So I have some stuff about the science of motivation, self-efficacy, and some things about test anxiety and reducing that, that could be useful for all of you. So we'll see how much time we have, how much of that we end up doing. But let's see if this works. Perfect. So I am part of this group called the Learning Scientists. If you've never heard of us, no problem. What we do is the four of us are all cognitive psychologists and have very similar training. And we had these conversations about how we know so much about how people learn. And we do a really good job of writing it up, publishing it in journals that no one ever reads. And so we're not really doing much with all of this great information that we have. And so we got together and we publish weekly blogs and podcasts, and we have tons of downloadable materials. And all of it just is in the name of trying to get the word out about what we know about the science of learning to people that could actually help you. Okay, so our website is there. I'll also probably talk about resources at the end that we have on there in case you guys are interested. But kind of the way that I'm framing today is to talk a little bit about what I call kind of an effective learning cycle. Because learning really involves all of these things. And if there are gaps in any of these areas, we have problems. So what I am not going to be talking about today really at all is scaffolding. So this is all about what's happening in your class, and a lot of this has to do more with the person leading your class than it does you. But we are going to talk about reinforcement first, and then how that actually leads into more motivation often. So we'll start with, again, retrieval practice here. So retrieval practice, well, you tell me, what's retrieval practice?
Sort of intermittently throughout a month or so, just brushing up on concepts they learned more towards the beginning.
Okay.
Various units.
Anybody want to add anything?
Just trying to actively remember something that you went over before, like seeing what you can come up with on your own without looking at the notes.
Yeah, so the key part for retrieval practice is practicing retrieval, as it turns out. That's all it really is. It's literally bringing something to mind is retrieval practice, and any way that you do that is retrieval practice. So you're brushing up on things, but the critical part is you're doing it without looking anything up, which is often not what students do. It's not what intuitively feels right. It feels like I need to reread it in order to make sure that I know it. So retrieval practice is so cool because it has lots and lots of different effects on learning. So we have what we call these indirect effects. So that is by bringing something to mind, I get feedback. So I find out if I know it or not. I find out if my answer is correct or not. It gives somebody an opportunity to give me feedback. It might tell me okay, I know this topic really well, but it turns out I can't remember anything about this, so I probably want to spend more time studying over here. Okay, so study allocation. And it can be kind of motivating that you are trying to retrieve something and either you're successful and you feel good about the stuff that you did, or you're trying to retrieve something and you realize you can't. And so you study a little bit longer than you otherwise would have. So those are indirect effects because retrieval practice causes those things, and then all of those things can cause additional learning. The cool thing, and the reason I'm here talking to you, is that retrieval practice has a direct effect on learning. That is, Without any of this, without any feedback, without ever looking at something again, just by virtue of bringing something to mind, you strengthen that information. You literally create new neural routes. It's so cool. So I'm going to prove that to you. I'm not just going to leave it there. So this is a classic study in retrieval practice. If you know anything about retrieval practice, you've probably already heard this. But in this study, they had two groups of students. And the first group studied a passage. Let's say it was a passage about otters. And then they reread it 3 times. Mixed in with other passages too, but here they're just rereading passages. So they read this passage about otters, they read it again, they read it again, they read it again. In the other group, they read it 1 time, and then they were given a blank sheet of paper and said, tell me everything you can remember about otters. Do it again. Do it again. And it feels like, why are we doing this? This is weird, right? But it's just a blank sheet of paper, and they're trying to retrieve everything they can. So the first group read it 4 times. Second group read it once, retrieved it 3 times. Then they predicted how much they would remember on a test 1 week later. Okay? And so the question is, how much did they actually learn? So the first thing I want to show you is actually their predictions. What we see is that reading something over and over and over again feels good. It feels like, yeah, I know this. I feel like I know it pretty well. Whereas the other group, they've read it once. They tried to retrieve it. They know they didn't remember much. And so they predict that they're going to remember less later on. When we look at actual performance, we see a nice little reversal there. Okay? So importantly, just looking at these bars, that is a direct effect of retrieval. The retrieval group never got to read it again, right? All they did was read it 1 time. This group read it 4 times. The difference between them is retrieval only, okay? So there's a huge power of retrieval here, but then we also have this issue where the repeated reading group is overconfident. Have you ever taken a test and you walk in feeling like, yeah, I know this, and then you bomb it? And it's like, what happened here? This is what happened. When you're repeatedly reading, it feels like you know it, but that doesn't necessarily predict how well you'll actually be able to retrieve it. If you're constantly practicing retrieving it, that's what you're going to be asked to do on the test. And so there we see much better metacognition, much better alignment between prediction and performance. They're actually slightly underconfident. They do better than they thought they would. So retrieval practice is this, but retrieval practice isn't just writing out everything you know, right? That's what it was in this study. But what counts as retrieval practice? What kind of retrieval practice do you do?
Notes.
Notes. Tell me what you mean by that.
Summarizing what I've read.
Okay, summarizing what you've read without anything in front of you. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, perfect. What else? So summarizing from memory. What else do you do?
Math.
Tell me more.
Like you just do the same type of equations. Like you got different ways to solve integrals. You just solve different integrals in the same way.
Yeah, so you practice. You practice. Yeah, okay. So any kind of skills practice? Yes. Anybody else? Yeah.
Test and retest.
Yeah, so any kind of like multiple choice or short answer questions. All of this counts as retrieval practice. The key is that you're bringing it to mind. So it can be something like a brain dump where you're literally just everything that I can remember, or summarizing everything that I can remember. It can be drawing something out, right? So you could draw a picture. That's retrieval practice. It can be answering questions, so quiz questions or short answer questions. It can be creating some kind of organizational scheme for something, right? That's retrieval practice. It can also be practicing skills. So whether we're talking about something like CPR or we're talking about integrals, you're still practicing skills, and that requires retrieval. Or it can even be a conversation, right? So I could put everything away and just have a chat with you about retrieval practice. And as we're having that conversation, you have to bring stuff to mind so we can talk. Now, the critical part of that, though, is the person who gets the retrieval practice benefit is the person who's doing the retrieval. So right now, when I asked you guys, like, what is retrieval practice? I know in that moment that there are 3 of you who know who retrieved. I know that. But there are a lot of other of you that, I don't know, maybe you're thinking about how good Gus's pretzels are, or maybe you're thinking about retrieval practice. I have no idea, right? So importantly, even in like a conversation or a debate, or if you're quizzing your friends, It only works if everybody's trying to retrieve, right? It's that mental effort that really matters. Okay, so I also want to tell you that flashcards count, but there's a right and a wrong way to do flashcards. Okay, so in this study, they use Swahili English word pairs. So mashua means boat in Swahili. And so folks studied those, and then they got a little practice test, which is what you do with a flashcard, right? You see mashua, and you have to say boat. Okay, so they got mashua, they had to say boat, and then they got immediate feedback. So they got to kind of restudy that pair again. And then they saw it again. And then if they got it right here, it got dropped. Right? So this is, imagine you've got your flashcard deck and you're like, okay, I got that one, so I can put that out. I don't need to study that anymore. I'm going to study the rest. Okay? In the next condition, if they got it right on that second try, they got to study it 2 more times. So it kept stayed in the deck 2 more times, but they just studied it. And in the last condition, if they got it right that second time, then they tested it 2 more times. Okay? So it stayed in the deck, basically. And then when we look at performance, what we see is in the drop condition, it's abysmal. Like they don't remember the stuff that they dropped. In the restudy condition, it's not much better, but when they tested 2 more times, look at that. Like that is a huge difference. So if you're using flashcards, keep them in the deck. Don't throw them out. Okay? So successful retrieval once isn't necessarily the best predictor for successful retrieval later on. We want to retrieve multiple times is what this tells us. All right, I'm going to stop here for just a second. Any questions right now? Cool. All right, so the next question is, what's the mechanism for retrieval practice? What's really happening here? So we already kind of talked about this, right? We said there's a direct effect here. What's happening is when you reread something, you kind of like activate the neurons that you already looked at, but when you retrieve something, you lay down new memory traces. So you're creating new strengthening of neuronal connections. So you're actually strengthening your ability to retrieve that later on. Okay, and then again, we also have all these indirect effects too, which in the science, we care a whole lot about what's a direct effect and what's an indirect effect. For you all, who cares? It just works, right? So lots and lots and lots of reasons why this is working. Okay, the next study I want to tell you about is, right, so the first study, no feedback there. They read about otters, they retrieved otters, they never got to read it again, okay? And we still see an effect, really, really cool. But if we let them read about otters again, it gets even cooler. Let me show you this. Okay, so in this study, I'm going to walk you through what you're looking at. Sorry for everyone online. What you are looking at down here are 4 different conditions, okay? In the no test condition, that means they just studied something, but they didn't get like that initial quiz or anything. They just read about otters 1 time, okay? And then they either had a no study condition. So these are people who didn't even get to read the passage about otters. They didn't even read it. They didn't take a quiz on it. They know nothing about otters. This is just like what you know about otters walking in the door. I don't know why this is all about otters. Oh, and I'm drawing on the board. That's okay. All right. This group got to read about otters once, and the other one got to read about it twice. Okay? So, again, this first bar is going to be people who just walking in the door, that's what we get. The second bar here is going to be reading once. The third bar is going to be reading twice. Okay. So reading twice in this study was worth something, okay? This next one is they took a quiz, but they got no feedback on that quiz. That's very similar to what I showed you the first time. And here, performance looks like this. So these are folks who read about it first and then took a quiz. They're doing much better than they were before, okay? So that's that direct effect of retrieval. The next group got quizzed and immediately were told what the correct answers were on that quiz. Now we see things are bumping up a lot further. And then the last group got delayed feedback. So they didn't get to know the answers right away. 2 days later, they came back and then they got the answers to their quiz. And look at this. What I want to show you here is that dark bar, that first bar, those people never read anything at all. And they're performing the same as people who read twice. So that is the really big difference here. retrieval practice with good quality feedback is better than even reading your darn textbook or going to class to begin with. Isn't that wild? Like, do it. It's really good for you. Also go to class and read your textbook. But it matters a lot. So it's really, really powerful to use retrieval practice with feedback. It's a really, really powerful way to learn. Okay, questions about that? Yeah.
So within our own studying, how can we give ourselves that delayed feedback? Is there a way to do that?
There are. It's a little bit more challenging for you guys, possibly. So one way to do that is if you have like quiz questions in the back of a textbook, if you use ChatGPT to create quiz questions for you, that's something that you can do. You can wait to actually look up the answers to those things until the next day. So at the med school, that's what we recommend students do a lot. They do a lot of retrieval practice. A lot of their studying is just doing questions upon questions upon questions. And that's exactly what we encourage them to do, is do a block of questions, but don't look at it until at least the next day. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's just a matter of like getting your hands on good stuff to use for that. Even if you're doing brain dumps, you can do a brain dump, but then look at it the next day to check against your notes to make sure that you did that completely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, for like the practice questions we provide students, does it matter like how they get their feedback? Like if they look up answers versus if like Canvas provides them the answers?
It matters whether or not they do it. And whether or not they process the feedback. So in the research, these two things tend to be conflated quite a bit. That when we want students to look up their own answers, sometimes they don't or don't process it well. When we can set up a situation that's contrived that kind of forces them to do that, then you do get some benefits from them sort of like finding it and processing it on their own. But the much bigger effect is them just processing it at all. So whatever you can do to make that happen is the most important. Yeah. Other questions right now? Cool. Okay, so when does retrieval practice not work? And I already kind of mentioned this, but one of the times when retrieval practice is less effective is when we do something called covert retrieval. So in this study, what they did was they had folks who were sitting at a computer, let's say doing those like flashcards, like Mashawa boat, right? And so a flashcard would come up and they would have to say boat out loud. And so they had three conditions. They had one person who was in the retrieval practice condition. So the flashcard would come up and they would have to say the correct answer out loud. The second condition was a restudy condition where they just got Mashawa and boat next to each other. They don't need to respond there. The last condition was a monitoring task. So that would mean I'm sitting in a room and I'm saying out loud the answers and somebody next to me is judging whether or not I get them right. Okay, so you could be the person like sitting there judging and you would be in the monitoring task condition, right? So you're sitting there and you're like on a piece of paper trying to grade my answers. Okay, so presumably, if you're grading someone's answers, you're retrieving, right? Like you have to retrieve the answer in order to know whether or not their answer is correct, right? So we would expect that that should work well. Unfortunately, it doesn't work so well. So then we can look at an immediate test basically or a 2-day delay. And here's what we see. The people who are sitting there supposed to be retrieving aren't doing it. Basically. Instead, they're sitting there waiting for you to say something, and you say boat, and they go, is it? And they answer a question, right? So unless we are actually actively retrieving, retrieval doesn't work. So if you're sitting in class and your teacher is asking questions, your best bet is to be sitting there trying to answer those questions. Write down an answer. If you're just listening to other people answer questions, you're not getting any retrieval practice benefit, okay? Questions about that? Cool. The other time that retrieval practice is less effective is when there is a lot of anxiety, Okay, so retrieval practice can cause anxiety for folks, and I'm going to talk about like when that is and when that isn't. Frankly, this is possibly more useful for the educators in the room than for the students. But anxiety can block learning. So if we're in really highly anxious situations, we don't learn as much. So when retrieval causes a lot of anxiety for folks, they don't get as much out of that as they would if they were like calmly retrieving. Okay, so the factors that cause anxiety, okay, are timing, right? So if you feel like you're pressured to answer a question quickly, it causes more anxiety, right? Like, that's not surprising. I could probably ask you guys to give me these things and you'd be like, let me tell you. This is what causes anxiety. Okay, the second is grading, right? If you feel like you're being judged based on your answer, causes more anxiety than if it's just like a learning exercise. The third is if you know it's for like what the purpose is. If the purpose is for learning and you know that, I tell you, we're gonna do some retrieval practice today. You're not gonna turn it in. You're not even gonna put your name on it. The reason we're doing this is because I know it's gonna help you later on. Less anxiety there because I'm not doing this to judge you. It doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong. And the last is social comparison. If I cold call and say, you answer this question, that causes some anxiety, right? And nobody's surprised here because then other people can hear whether or not you're getting it right or wrong, okay? So given these four things, if you guys are like practicing retrieval on your own, like at home, you're like, okay, I wanna do some retrieval practice. I know it's gonna help me in my classes. How do you do that in a way that's going to reduce anxiety? What's the best way to do it? What's a bad way to do it? Do that differently.
Put yourself on a constant training.
Yeah, so setting your own timer, probably not a good idea. Yeah, I agree. What else?
Maybe a better way of doing it would be sort of spreading out your learning so you have plenty of time in order to learn the material.
Yeah, so just in general, not like, oh, we have an exam on Thursday. I will start studying Wednesday at midnight. Because then there's a timer, right? Like somebody in the room might do that, right? What else? Yeah.
Distractions, a TV playing in the background or each child running around.
Yeah, I mean, this is all, that might all contribute to like the timing part of it, right? That when you have those distractions, it's gonna take more time and therefore you're gonna feel more pressure. What about with your friends? So retrieval practice is really great as like a we quiz each other kind of situation, but is that a good idea or not? What do you think?
You know, because one person, like you said before, is monitoring, so just saying, oh yeah, that's right, off of a piece of paper, so they're not really getting anything. Unless you take turns
Mm-hmm.
and one person retrieves while the other person reads the answers and then vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So she was saying like with that monitoring task, like that might not be great because then like you're not getting anything if you're asking all the questions and they're doing all the answering, right? But taking turns might mitigate that. What about anxiety? Does it cause you anxiety to study with friends? You're like looking at your friends like, not gonna admit it right now, are we? No, so this is where this like social comparison piece comes into play. If you create a safe space, then it's okay to have like retrieval in front of other people. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here, is that, you know, if you can study with your friends and you don't feel like people are judging you, then this social comparison piece like falls away. That's not an issue unless you feel like people are judging you, right? So anxiety is one factor to consider. I want to tell you a little bit more about anxiety. Anybody in here, like you can like give me like a sly thumbs up if you don't want to give me a full-on hand raise. Experience some test anxiety? You're among friends. I can tell you that most of the room just gave me at least some kind of signal. So there's a pretty cool strategy that you can use to mitigate test anxiety because frankly, for me, I would rather your tests, like your actual exams, not just be assessments, but be learning opportunities for you. If we can mitigate the anxiety, not only will you perform better on that assessment, but you also will learn something from it. And that sounds good to me. So I want to tell you just a little bit about why anxiety is a problem. So when we learn, information first enters sort of this short-term memory store. We call it working memory. And we call it working memory because that is where we really process information. We pull stuff from long-term memory, we bring in new information, we think about things, we wrestle with things, we problem solve, all in this space, okay? And it's finite. It's finite both in terms of space. You can't hold on to everything at once. And in terms of time, if you don't do something with the stuff there, it disappears forever, right? But I really want to focus on this space issue. Unfortunately, perhaps, we're all kind of just born with the working memory space we have. You can only hold so much stuff in working memory, and some people can hold more than others. It's just the way of the world. But when we have stuff going on in our lives, maybe it's test anxiety, right? We're worried about our performance on this exam. But maybe it's finances, or maybe it's the argument you had with your mom this morning, okay? Any of those things kind of sit in working memory, taking up space. And there's a reason for this. So evolutionarily, this is like a really good system. Because when I was worried, not me, when my ancestors were worried about lions, and part of their working memory was devoted to like monitoring for lions. I'm like, I'm not always saying I'm having a conversation with you, but my brain is out there looking for a lion somewhere. I'm gonna respond a lot faster if that lion pops out of the bushes because my brain was already prepped for it. Now, it's useless because exams don't jump out of bushes, okay? But part of our brains are constantly sort of monitoring for these things that we're worried about. So if we can offload those things, if we can get them out of working memory, now we have more space. We have more space for retrieval, for problem solving, for all the things we need to do when we're taking a test, okay? So there's been some work done on this thing called expressive writing. So I'm gonna tell you about this real quickly. In this, what they did was they gave a math anxiety assessment. Anybody got math anxiety? A little bit of math anxiety? Sure. So they gave a math anxiety assessment and they split people into those that had high and low math anxiety, and then they gave them a math test because they were cruel. So now, presumably, the low math anxiety people are fine and the high math anxiety people are anxious because they just did math, okay? And then they split them one more time. They had a group that was a control group. So after they got done with their math test, they just kind of sat there quietly. The other group was given an expressive writing task. The expressive writing task was take 7 minutes, write down everything that you're worried about. Tell me about your anxiety for 7 minutes, okay? And then they gave them another math test to see how they would do on that one. Now, importantly, this math test had easy problems and hard problems. Easy problems don't take a lot of working memory. They're easy. We don't need to like think about them a whole lot. But the hard problems take a lot of working memory. So if we can open up working memory, we should do better on those problems. So for the group that was sitting quietly, we see exactly what we expected. Those who had high anxiety perform a lot worse on the high working memory demand questions, on the hard questions, right? That's where we see a problem. Easy questions, it's not a problem. Hard questions, big problem. After expressive writing, that difference is no longer there. So you see a slight difference there, but it's non-significant. So there's no functional difference between groups at this point, okay? So this is a really low stakes thing. It's 7 minutes of sitting there writing about anything you're worried about. It's like, oh my gosh, if I don't pass this test, I'm gonna fail out of school, I'm never gonna get my job, my mom's gonna be disappointed. But it's also anything else that you're worried about, right? It's the finances, it's the arguments with friends, it's whatever. Write it down. Your brain tags that with like, okay, that's over here. I can pick that back up later. And it will. It's not like the anxiety just magically goes away, but for a little while, it's no longer sitting in working memory, clogging up the system and blocking you from performing, okay? Yep, so it's 5 to 10 minutes right before you wanna use your working memory. This works for learning as well as assessment. So if you're trying to learn something dense, you can do this to help you with that as well, okay? And it's writing about everything you're worried about. Okay. I'm gonna stop right there. let's chat about retrieval practice for a little bit. So I might ask for support here. Not everybody in this room is working on the project, right? That's what I thought. So let's just take a minute. Given everything that I've said, I would like for you guys to, you've got, I don't know what's on your little retrieval practice, little note-taking guide there. It's fine. But I'd really like to just take a minute to let you guys brainstorm. I want you to think about in your own classes that you have right now, how could you incorporate more retrieval practice? What would that look like? What resources would you need that you don't have right now? Come up with as many ideas as you can. You can feel free to write actually, let's do that. Let's take 2 minutes to write, and then we will share we'll do a little think, pair, share. And then we'll share with a friend. So take 2 minutes, write down every idea that you can think of. All right, I want to hear from somebody I have not heard from yet. What ideas did you get? Either yours or your partner's, I don't care which. I could start making awkward eye contact, but I don't really want to. I say that and everybody's eyes like
I
this.
can still talk to you if you want.
Nope.
Flashcards.
I already heard from you.
You did?
I did. You told me the definition of retrieval practice.
Oh, I thought you meant on this thing. Never mind.
Thank you.
I like the energy.
I do. I like the energy.
We have that same problem in our class. Good problem. We participate a lot.
All right, ladies in the back row, who wants to tell me something?
Maybe practice tests.
How are you going to make them?
Probably I might utilize like ChatGPT or something, so I can generate questions.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure everybody knows. So ChatGPT will not always be 100% accurate, right? You know this, this is AI considerations. And it's also as good as the prompts you put in. So your best bet is always to try to practice in the way that you will be tested. So if you are practicing with ChatGPT, you can ask ChatGPT for multiple choice questions. You can ask it for short answer questions. You can actually copy and paste your notes into ChatGPT and say, please generate questions just based on this. So there's lots of different ways. You can ask for application questions or fact-based. So just be very, very careful about the prompts that you put in so that you're getting those questions in a way that you want them. But otherwise, I think go for it. There is also, just to share with you, a free tool called Notebook LM that I just learned about this last weekend. I have not looked into it myself, but it's like ChatGPT, but you put in all the source material. So you could just put in your notes from class, and it would only be using that to generate the correct answers and not using the World Wide Web that may or may not be accurate. What else? All right, you ladies.
Start retrieval drawing one.
Start what?
Retrieval drawing.
Retrieval drawing. Okay, tell me a little bit more about that. What does that mean to you?
Just draw information.
Yeah, so one of the important things there is that it depends on the content, right? There are some things that are great for, if you're in a biology class, draw something, right? There's going to be lots of things to draw in biology. But if you're learning integrals, I'm not sure what you're drawing, right? That's a little bit more challenging. Perhaps if you're drawing integrals, you have beautiful pages full of integrals. I love that. Right, so it depends, right? So really for most strategies we talk about, that's usually true, except for retrieval practice, which you can retrieve something all the time. But how you do it is really use what makes most sense for that material. So I like that. You also don't have to be an artist for that to be effective. And that's an important piece too. One more, you two. Second to last row there, yeah.
You could quiz yourself the day after you learn the material, and then a couple days later come back and review what you answered, and then retest yourself.
I like that. So I like that on multiple levels. So you've incorporated retrieval practice, you've incorporated delayed feedback, and you've incorporated multiple times of retrieval practice, all of which are just going to enhance those effects. Okay. Do you guys have any questions right now about how to implement retrieval practice effectively?
Do you have any tips for time management, I suppose? Because I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle for me.
Elaborate a little bit.
So I feel like it's kind of tricky when you've got, say, like 5 different subjects and you're trying to get information for each subject, of course. How exactly can you sort of design your study schedule to encompass all the material while still, having time to eat, sleep, and that kind of thing?
I hear you. Sorry, what do you? Sure.
Does any of your subjects, like, are they cohesive? Like, do you go over stuff in one class and then they go over the same kind of material in the other class?
I could apply it, I think.
Spoken like a real psych major.
Well, because if so, then you could use elaboration.
Oh, like your
Yeah, like my presentation tomorrow. See you.
This is making me really happy right now. Yeah.
If you elaborate, and kind of like try to connect them, it would be a little bit easier. I think like 3 of my classes talk about the same things. So I try to use that.
What does Justin tell you to do?
Interleaves.
Yes. And what does that mean?
Make sure that you kind of put them together in the same study session and break up the different, like, the time intervals in which you study. So, like, make sure it's always random.
Thank you.
See, we're talking about all of your.
I know. I'm so proud right now. I love it. Yeah, so a few other kind of nuanced things. There's some research showing that the most efficient way of doing retrieval practice is to test yourself on things until you get everything right once. You're not going to maximize your score this way, right? I told you if you do it multiple times, if you retrieve something multiple times, you're going to do better. But the research also shows that there's a couple of studies out there now showing that if you like quiz yourself, like let's say you had flashcards and I showed you like the dropped condition thing, but that if you like just make sure you get everything right at least once, that's going to be better. So when I'm talking to my medical students, there is literally no way under the sun that they can know all of it. It's not possible. There's way too much. And so what I talk to them about is picking and choosing to retrieve the things that are going to be most high yield for them, which are the things that they know least. I also hate the term high yield, so I hate that I just said that, but I'm like fully in that world now. But right, it's the things that you know the least, that you need the most practice on. And so kind of using your own metacognition to know what areas are your weaknesses and really using retrieval practice as much as you can in those areas is one way to be successful there. The other thing is to use small pockets of time that folks are not always so good at, but you can, while you're, I don't know, sitting at Starbucks waiting for them to brew your coffee, open up a notebook and cover up half of it and try to retrieve the other half, right? Like very, very simple, silly retrieval practice, but very effective and is something that you can do anytime, anywhere, so long as you have something in front of you, right? The same is true for like, if you make Quizlets or something like that, right? You can do that from your phone where, like, as you're walking across campus. So my advice for students is always to make sure you are trying to create these small pockets of time and use them as you can so that you're doing this kind of consistently. It is so much better to have small pockets that you're doing than to have one 5-hour study session and try to find time for that. You're never going to find time for that. That's crazy, right? But to try to build in small pockets of time that are maybe 10 or 15 minutes, you could probably find more time than you realize. So those are my like little pieces of advice there. It's not perfect because there's not enough time to do it all. There just never is. Yeah.
That makes sense though, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, I got something.
Oh, okay.
So we were saying like if you could like modularize the components of like whatever you're trying to learn, and then we were thinking like ADHD, you could use it as an asset. So like if you have a bunch of different things and you can't stay focused on one, and so you bounce through the like distribution of them,
Yes.
maybe you could end up better at all of them. And I thought maybe that guy said something about
Yep.
there being good in randomness.
Yep.
Like
Yeah, you literally just described interleaving. Now, so interleaving, this idea of bouncing between topics, is most effective when you are trying to differentiate things. So there's always a benefit to it, to be very honest, of like the bouncing around some, because you get a spaced practice effect from doing that. But there's also this benefit if you've got two topics that are kind of similar, and it's really hard to, like, people confuse these things a lot, like in intro psych, different the different types of reinforcement and punishment, right? People confuse these things. If you interleave those a little bit, so you don't just get like 10 of the same type of math problem in a row, but you do one of those and then one of these over here and then one of these, then you're more likely to be able to tell the difference between them. So that's what that sort of jumping around interleaving is particularly good for. But absolutely. It's also true that our brains just like a lot of breaks. So especially if you're doing something dense, taking a short break, a little 5-minute break, and that short 5-minute break can be to go quiz yourself on something else, is actually really, really good for learning. Yeah. Anybody else? Do you want me to tell you about motivation real quick? Okay, real quick. I'll do this fast. Okay, so I am telling you about one theory of motivation. There are a lot out there, but this one I like because it is very clear and concrete what you can do. So there's 4 components. I call these levers, 4 levers that you can pull for motivation. There's perceived value, autonomy, relationships, and competence. I'm going to talk about each of them in turn here. So when we're talking about perceived value, that is the question, what's in it for me? Why do I have to do this, okay? And so the first part is instrumental. That is, what will this accomplish for me? So maybe I think that my intro psych class is a waste of my time, but if knowing that I get a good grade in this intro psych class will help me to keep my scholarship, or help me to apply for the next thing, or make my parents proud, whatever it might be, that becomes instrumental value. Like it's good. Intrinsic is like, do I just enjoy this in and of itself? Okay. So if you see your motivation dipping, you can stop for a second and say, okay, if I do well in this class, what are the downstream effects of that? Like, what is that going to do for me? And that can boost your motivation. Okay. The next is autonomy. Nobody likes being told that they have to do really anything. Like, we just don't like it. So autonomy is all about perceived choice, but it is perceived choice. Okay, so it doesn't mean like we suddenly have like the choice of our entire curriculum. Like, I've now decided that I don't actually need intro psych. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. We are talking about like all the different choices that you do have in a day though. You have the choice whether or not to go to class. There might be penalties or consequences if you don't, but you have that choice every single day. Sometimes in some classes, you have the choice of how you want to demonstrate your knowledge, that there might be a project and you get to choose the topic, right? But noticing and recognizing the choices that you have will make you feel better about the things that you have to do. Okay? The third is relationships. It's thinking about who cares? Who's relying on me to do this? It's recognizing that you're in it with other people. So if it's a particularly challenging class, get a study group, because suddenly you're not alone. Everybody hates this, right? And we're doing it together. It's thinking about the fact that, like, maybe going and meeting with your professor so that they know you and they care about you, and you can see that they really want you to succeed. They do, I promise, most of them. Most of them want you to succeed, right? But being able to like cultivate some of those relationships, get to know people in class, get to know your professors a little bit, so that you feel the fact that there are other people who are really kind of relying on you, noticing whether you're there or not. They care about your success, matters. The last one is competence. So competence is talking about self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is my belief in my ability to do a thing at this moment, right? So I might have high self-efficacy for math and low self-efficacy for art. I do. That is accurate. So I believe I can do math. I do not believe that I can do art, okay? And there are a lot of things that build up self-efficacy. Those are previous experiences. So when we succeed at something and remember the fact that we succeed at it, we're more likely to believe that we can, okay? So for you, that might be, you know what? Last semester was hard too, and I got through that. I can do this too. Okay? Vicarious experiences is noticing other people who have done what you're trying to do and done it successfully, who are like you. So that can be, just thinking about the fact that, you know what, last year there was a whole group of people who took this class and succeeded. They did it. I can do it too. The third is messages from others. You can request this. You can call your mama and say, Mom, I don't think I can do it. Just so that she goes, I know you can, right? It feels good. It just really feels good to have anybody tell you that, but you really can kind of request that from other people. And the last is psychological state. And so this is really referring to like how you're feeling on a given day. Don't pull an all-nighter before an exam. You're not going to feel good walking in there, right? You're going to be groggy. You're not going to feel confident in your ability to succeed, okay? Looking at you. You made the face earlier when I said the don't start studying at midnight. She's like, why are you calling me out? It can include lots of other things too here, like if you're super hungry or if you're super stressed, all of those things kind of factor in there. And so anything we can do to try to take care of our own like minds and bodies helps with self-efficacy as well. Now it turns out self-efficacy matters for performance. So I'm just gonna tell you very quickly, you're gonna love this study. So this was an intro psych class. And in this intro psych class, everybody took a self-efficacy test, like just to measure their own like belief in their abilities of the class. And then they were split into 3 groups based on their exam 1 performance. So there were our low performers, average, and high performers in the class. And then halfway between exam 1 and 2, they got sent an email. Half of them got a neutral email that was just like, hey, just checking in, how's studying going? The other group got an email that targeted all 4 of these. It said, I really loved what you did on that first project, so I feel really good about how you're gonna do on this next exam. The vicarious, so something about like other students like you have done well, I believe in you, and then had some like pointers for reducing stress, okay? And it worked, it's so cool. Okay, so this is like the overall effect right here. So you're really comparing these 2 bars. So from exam 1 to exam 2, the control group went down a little bit. The neutral email went down a little bit. And those who got the self-efficacy email had a boost. Just from an email from their professor. This is cool. No? Nobody's, okay. I think this is so cool. It's not a huge effect, but it's like, they went up by like 4% on the test. And then they broke it down by who had this effect, okay? And so this is the performance based on where they were. So the high achievers didn't really need the email. They had high self-efficacy anyway. They believed in themselves because they're high achievers. But the people who had low achievement, they went from a failing grade to not a failing grade. They went up 10% on this test. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal, all based on just their belief in their abilities. I'm out of time. That's all I wanted to share with you. We have some resources on our website in case they're useful for you guys. Like I said, posters, podcast, blog, books. The middle one is for you guys. Ace that test. That's it.